I suggest that we start this roundtable to encourage people to come and sit. So thank you for participating to this roundtable on how to make conformity a pillar in the cybersecurity sector. So this is something that we've been talking about for years now, and so today we're here to see where we're at, maybe to see, to share about our experience as well, and so to talk more about cybersecurity. My name is Jérôme Villois. I work at the Waystone company, and I will be presenting this roundtable with 4 speakers, as you can see. I will start at my right with Gaston Gontrenaud from the CNIL. He's an engineer in the technological expertise sector, and he works especially in consultancy to do a bridge in between the technical and legal aspect of his job. At my right, there is Ludovic de Carpouet, who is working for Ludomis. He's an engineer, security engineer, and he's created the structure of the company. And he now works on conformity and on tooling as well to make sure that tooling is compliant with the regulation. Then at my left, I have Vincent Desroches, who works for a company in cybersecurity as well.
Sécurité et conformité. Donc Vincent est à la sous-direction.
Vincent is working on the strategy department. He's at the head of the digital security department. You've probably seen him because he works a lot in when it comes to risk management, public policies, and he works a lot on the regulations that that have an impact on our daily life, the NIS directive, and maybe further evolutions as well. Maybe we'll have some breaking news today, we'll see. And then we have also a pillar for digital trust with especially our RDS. And then last but not least, we have Paul Frosto, who works for Michelin. He's the cybersecurity risk analyst leader, and he is specialized in cybersecurity analytics. And he supports a lot of the Michelin branches to make sure that they are compliant with the cybersecurity regulation. I hope that he'll be able to share a lot of his experience in the field. I don't know if you can hear me well, because I feel like there's an echo that is not so pleasant to hear, but if that's okay in the room, it's fine for me. So let's go back to our topic, conformity and cybersecurity. So the first question that we will be talking about is how can we link cybersecurity and conformity? We usually put them in a position, but we can see that when we're in the field, when we're piloting cybersecurity project, we try to make our company evolve. Usually we are faced with regulation that usually is coming out of nowhere. We feel like it's not linked to what our company does, because usually it's only cover one scope of our company, only one perimeter, but not all of them. Maybe this regulation dealing with problems that we've never faced before. So we can have the feeling that we are not really concerned by this regulation. So the idea is to show that it's not only within companies that we think it is important, but that it's important for everyone. So the first question I will be asking to our different speakers is how can we link those two worlds that can be on opposite sides, or that can be linked. So maybe
d'une société.
Ludovic de Carpouet. So I'm thinking of a method that we've used for a company in the agribusiness. They had called us to become compliant with the GDPR. So we are being contacted by the managing director. So we've decided to support them, to help them be compliant. I mean, this is quite easy when it comes to the GDPR. There's not so much data. And so at the end of the appointment, I've asked a question, and I'm asking, what are the risks in your facilities? What about the IT risks? And they tell us that they have pretty much done nothing. So conformity helped us have organized to organize an appointment, to assess the different risks we could be facing, also what is part of the GDPR. And when we were working on GDPR, we're not working on the security of those facilities. There was also an industrial company that had 8 different plans of action for different conformity issues. So whether it was legal, cyber, or information system compliance. So it was a bit complicated because we had to consolidate those plans of actions and to implement them. That was a gigantic task. And so we had to move towards something else because the plans of action did not work. So of course, conformity helps us move forward. This is something that we need. I think it's a great lesson to draw from all of this. It helped us move forward through fines, actually, and a lot of things happened, especially for SMEs. All right, thank you, Paul, and thank you for giving us an overview of what's happening in the field. And Paul, what could you tell us? I'm going to try and speak slowly. I'm sorry about my accent, but I'll be speaking slowly for you to understand. So yes, when it comes to risk analysis, risk assessment, I mean, this is essential, and we can't do without that. It's impossible. Even though we are compliant with the different regulations, we still need to do a risk assessment because we have legal obligations. And so these risk assessments and risk analysis really help us to determine what are the priorities in the field. So we can determine whether the legal framework is based on security or not. And so it's important to do a link between the risk analysis and conformity. Conformity is at the base of security. So depending on the methodologies that we use, but we have different methodologies for risk assessment, we need to go from the base, and conformity can be one of these base. But we need to insist on the fact that risk assessment is a top priority, because we need to make sure that the security is based on the risks that we might face rather than risks that are not likely to happen to us. So I started with the creation of a startup. And here conformity was extremely important for the company. For example, I knew that I had to be compliant with ISO 27000, otherwise I couldn't reach some markets that I wanted to reach. And so people also have to commit to be compliant with legislation such as the GDPR, because we have to protect our customers' data. So those are a few points in which I can probably bring a bit of my experience in the field. So not being compliant is definitely a risk, and this should be identified and appear in the risks mapping. Thank you. Vincent, in your teams, you have a method for risk analysis. You also talk about the different conformity standards. I guess that you probably have a lot to share when it comes to that. Hi, and thank you, Jérôme. I think it's very interesting to start with this question of conformity versus risk assessment. At ANSI, this is the question that was raised, because we knew that we had to change our method when it comes to risk analysis and bias, and we know that we had to create a strength line in between the two. And so conformity has to be integrated within the risk management. So what does that mean? Well, you have technical standards, you have ISO standards, you have hygiene standards, you have a lot of different requirements, a lot of demands. that are to be taken into account by the the person that is in charge of security and conformity. And then that's the first level. Then second level, you have legislation. Legislation that is usually categorized by sector. It's put into context. And then companies can usually complement their base by adding on top of that the base for legislation. So Paul was just talking about it a few seconds ago. And so when does the risk analysis gets in the picture? Well, the risk analysis gives us more context when it comes to the threat. We take into consideration the behaviors of attackers, the new trends in attacks as well, the ones that were created just not so long ago. And so we need to add this risk analysis at that point. I mean, to give you an example, when we have spying actions on an organization, attackers can use and exploit what we call the parasite signals. So this is in the basically Tempest area, but this is a threat that has been existing for quite a long time and still exists today. And because we've been improving our devices, it's not present anymore, but this is the type of attack that's able to monitor and to spy on our servers, for example. And we need to make sure that we're able to protect our company against this type of risks and danger. Imagine your company working on data that is very sensible, but it's not classified. Then you'll have to make sure that you're protecting your data from those parasite signals. So this is something you do with security, but you never think about it when it comes to conformity. Yes, thank you. We never really talk about Tempest technology. So it's important to talk about it again. Gaston, do you want to add a few words when it comes to this type of question? Especially from the CNIL side, what can you add? Yes, hi everyone. Is it better like this? Probably. Sorry about that. So the question was, how can we link conformity and risk management? So why should we separate them? I mean, I think we need to change our perspective. I mean, I think that legislators, whether it's for laws or regulation, the idea is to make things evolve and to make things evolve in the right direction. Nowadays, when we can see that threats are increasing exponentially, we should remind people that the legal frame is not in line with the technology, with the digital era. So legislators and the people that work on these laws and on this regulation, those people are the same that work on the standards definition for cybersecurity, to get back to our main topic. So the goal here is to increase the maturity of companies on this topic, because this is honestly a necessity that would be vital, because legislation and regulations are needed, and they force us to implement conformity. And the idea here is not for us to do separate things, but the idea is for us to make things evolve. Whether it's the level of legislators or national legislations or GDPR, the idea is to make those companies evolve, organizations to evolve as well, while taking into consideration all of the cybersecurity challenges. So we need to keep in mind, and probably we'll have the time to talk about it a bit later on, because I think this is a very essential notion. We need to remind ourselves that we usually separate both of them, because in our job, we have sectorial skills, we have specific skills. Usually we are told to be expert on certain topics, and this is how we get to the segmentation in between the legal aspect and other skills that we might have. But the idea here is to share information, to share our skills as well, and to have a global vision of our sector. I think this is the most important thing, and that we should be reminded of that. All right, so if we move on to a second question, because as Gaston was saying, legislation usually are becoming more diverse. They're more numerous as well. They usually like tens of tens of entities to make evolve if we want to change things. We can see that some legislations have been adapted to local legislations as well to make sure they could be implemented in every single country. We also see that in Belgium we have some very specific laws that are implemented as well, and usually it takes a lot of time. So the second question I wanted to ask to our expert is that how can we simplify the implementation of conformity in the field? Do we need to get more tools? Should we train people? How could we do this? Are we able to create conformity referentials in which we can integrate different legislations or regulation? And especially in international context, I guess it can be even more complicated. So maybe we could start with Paul. Maybe you could tell us more about how we can decline these conformity systems. How did you do at Michelin? Well, to give you some feedback about Michelin, of course, when we're talking about conformity, and here I'm going to be talking about conformity in terms of our internal policy. So we have a global framework that applies to every single site that we have around the world. So this is something that works pretty well. We have obviously different levels, but we still have a global framework. It gets a bit more complex when it comes to branches because Michelin has more and more companies, bought more and more companies. And so for these branches, we are often facing a problem because we're trying to make sure that branches have the same level of security that we want to have. So we want to make sure we're all at the same level, but the problem is that the maturity level of these branches is usually very different from one company to another. And we can't get to our branches and say, okay, so here is what you have to comply with, and deal with this on your own. This is too complicated. So we've decided to have an international framework, a global framework. We've called this the CIS. Sorry. So this is something that has been developed, which I think was well developed actually, and it's international as well. So it's a good thing to use. And here, at Michelin, we really wanted to have something that we could use worldwide and wanted to make sure that people could access to it. So this is the way we do it for branches in Michelin. We do this depending on the maturity level of the company, depending also on the objective. So depending on the objective that we have, we try to do a risk analysis to try and see which target we might have. And this is how we can increase their maturity level, we can increase their security level as well. So we start with the very basic levels of security, and then we'll increase slowly but surely up until the branches is completely secured. Thank you, Vincent. In your teams, you have a lot of different referentials. Should you have a one and only one referential that consolidates all of the others? Would that make sense? Is it something that we could create? What's your feedback? What's your experience when it comes to the operational part of your job? Yes, I think we can all say that there are a lot of regulations. So to start, I would recommend one thing. I think we need to create a link, a relationship with legislators. I'd be happy to know what Gaston and the CNIL think about that. But I think that you need to make sure, if you are a regular operator, if you are supposed to be compliant with one of the regulations that Jérôme was telling you about, maybe you should get closer to the CNIL, you should get closer to your regulators to make sure that you understand what's behind the text. what's behind the regulation, because when you discuss with the regulator, he is capable of explaining to you what the regulation means, what you're supposed to be doing, and that will help you to identify what type of journey you'll have to take to be compliant with this new regulation. I think this is the priority, because for us, there's only one thing we can tell you is to work on encryption, to work on segmentation, to work on your organization. And those other demands, those other requirements, you can postpone them a bit. But so first recommendation is for you to get closer to your favorite regulators, to understand the text properly, and to understand how you can upskill your entire company. Then second recommendation, I want to talk to you about security audits. When we have a CISO that just arrives in a company, I think the first recommendation is to do a security audit. This is pretty much a reflex. It enables you to highlight the security weaknesses that you might have within your company, to see also where you're not compliant with the current regulation. It also shows top management what are the different factors of exposure to risks, but also what are the weaknesses of the company, whether it's linked to security or legislation. When it comes to the harmonization of frameworks, maybe we'll talk about this a bit later, but yes, we are definitely working on this, and I'd like to finish by saying that with my colleagues from the organizational and territorial organization, and we are in contact with what we call the beneficiaries, when we're facing these type of difficulties, because we are facing them, maybe you'll be smiling at that, but sometimes it's important also to undramatize all of this, because we need to give sense to this. When we're asking to segment the administration segment, well, people need to understand why you have to do it. And once a company has been able to segment these networks, well, you know that you are going to make the attacker's life so much more complicated. And that is a victory in itself. I know that Lency talked about the CNIL when it comes to the link with regulations. I know that there's not so many people that have to follow the GDPR, the other standards that we're talking about. So thank you, Jérôme, for this transition. I know that, in fact, the number of companies are impacted by these regulations are not the same, depending on which regulation we're talking about. I'm not saying that all people should go and see the CNIL, because we won't be able to receive all of you, even though we would be happy to see some of you. But we need to get back to the basics. We need to go to the basics of the GDPR. But this is not, this is not the hot topic of this conference. Here we are here to talk about cybersecurity today. And on this regulation here, so for the GDPR, we need to implement a security system that meets the requirements for security. So we're not telling you to deploy new technologies, or we're not telling you to deploy one solution over another, but we're telling you to do a risk assessment, a risk analysis, to make sure that the tools that you're deploying are good enough for the risks that you may be exposed to. And as Vincent was saying earlier on, having a separation between production, development, distribution, etc. We know that we have a company that deployed a production system in a test environment that was not updated, so obviously in 48 hours, well, it was exposed to a risk, and there were some data that was stolen. And I think it shows, it's a good example that shows that it's not all about conformity and regulation. It's all about security. And you need to integrate security in your business processes on all of the value chain of your data. And so at the beginning of the conference, we were saying that we should not put professions in opposition, so we should not oppose cybersecurity and conformity. I think we should be working hand in hand because this perimeter, this scope of action is something that we all share. And so we should all be working together to make security, to strengthen that security. Thank you. And maybe Ludovic, you can tell us a bit more about tooling. How can we make community live, those that have to implement those regulations? So why do we need those tools? To sum up, sometimes we have people that come and see us and they're exhausted because there's one referential that is being published every 3 months and updates are released every month. They have to work with their legal team, etc. So they don't know how to do anymore because things are evolving, they're accumulating, and perimeters are different depending on which sector we're talking about, depending on which region or activity we're talking about. So it's always very complex to try and be compliant, to check up on conformity, to make sure that we have the right tools as well. It's always a bit more complex, in fact.
Autre chose qui se passe par...
Something else about these needs for tools, and we have seen this on the different benchmarks. It means that they do with a specific budget, with a one-shot project, and then little by little they're going to stop because they're exhausted. All of a sudden the person who is in charge leaves, and then everything crumbles down and something becomes obsolete after 1 year, and the person coming has to do everything all over. It's very complicated. We talk about conformity and we talk about compliance and ensure compliance. And what is really essential, and we have talked about it little by little, is that it should be collaborative. It should be the company's project. There should be some consistency between risk management, compliance, and mainly the activities of the company. I come from the audit circles. We would do photography, and we had to do films and movies. And people have to do something collaborative because we have the solution to include or integrate everything. People who work in the compliance sector are not always welcome. It doesn't add a lot of business. It means a lot of work. So if we could manage risks and guarantee sufficient compliance, everybody would be pleased. Management and also different professions. So this is the use of tools. People have been trying different methods and they become exhausted because this is not their job. And it could be interesting to wait, not to use the first solutions, and knowing that the process has to be transformed. The ways you do things have to be transformed. You need specific tools in different activities. But at the end of the day, you need simplification, streamlining, capitalizing a tool. Somebody wanted to respond? Yes, maybe to have a comprehensive approach. I would like to share an example. Well, people say we do risk analysis. You're asking us about privacy. We are going to have comprehensive things. We have to change our project totally. No, not at all. The aim is that you already implement risk analysis. Okay, there are some legal specific elements that have to be added about the freedom, the protection for the individual freedoms. Is just the perspective which is changing. The project is the same. In one case, if there is a financial risk which has to be covered in data protection, it's about the individual who is behind the data that you want to protect. You have to add this in your analysis and share it with the different activities of your business. And you have to use this. So it's a comprehensive point of view, despite the complex feature mentioned by Ludovic. Well, maybe, yes, we say +1. When you do a risk assessment of espionage, data theft, you are exposed to legal risks, and in relation with GDPR and your industrial secrecy. Therefore, the approach should be a joint approach. And one of the messages that we do agree together in this panel is this: we have to decompartmentalize the different fields. There are regulatory specificities. I'm not going to tell you that this is a detail, but you have to deepen it through this risk-based approach. Yes, there are different ransomwares. First of all, they are going to, of course, push you to pay the ransom, and they say otherwise we are going to disseminate your information. So the head of this business, they have to face the GDPR, and yes, so you need a decompartmentalization for success. So, well, this is the negative dimension of compliance. I can see that we are talking about being exhausted, but there are also structures which are able to transform compliance into a competitive dimension, a communication towards their own customers. For example, you can see Apple. Well, of course, you can discuss a lot about Apple, etc. But they say, okay, we do respect privacy. There are different actors that talk about this compliance. Maybe compliance can be a leverage. It can be an asset for the different companies which take care of compliance. I would like to listen to you, maybe, Gaston. What do you think about this? Being a competitive asset for a company. When you were asking the question, I was thinking about the standards. When you have to implement a standard, the aim is to improve things, of course, to meet the safety demands, to make people understand, to be visible. The aim of the regulator about all these topics is to oblige the implementation in consistency with all the standards that you use in a response which is consistent with the evolution of the threats. Yes, it's positive, but it has to be transformed. First of all, the company has to digest it somehow. I come from the financial world, which is extremely regulated. So we have high constraints in our profession, in all your professions, I'm sure. Well, it's not necessarily in relation with this need of compliance. Therefore, today I do repeat over and over, these approaches are not contradictory. It's a need of sharing, of understanding. Yes, there are different competences, there are different professions, so it's difficult to put them together in a company culture. However, in our issues at stake, in a few years ago when we would meet, we were talking about firewalls and antivirus. Today we don't talk about this. We say what are the legal solutions, what are the governance-related solutions, technical solutions to meet all those issues. So we already have the answers. We are already in a need of sharing competences in these fields. This is positive, but you need to be mature enough in the company to share all these. Thank you very much. Paul, maybe, would you like to make a feedback? And how would you value compliance? Yes, I would like to come back to what my colleagues were saying about regulatory matters. Yes, about the risk analysis, you have to give a meaning to what you do. So, taking care of safety and focusing on risks, yes, you need to be mature enough. Yes, this is what you have to focus. You have to put you have to put top management, all the different teams in the risk management, and to give a meaning to these measures that you have to fulfill, because there are risks. And therefore, the decision makers do understand. You have to say that, okay, risk analysis should be in relation with compliance. And therefore, you receive the support of the different teams. It's extremely important. And I really insist on that. I say, okay, this is what you have to do. And this is a meaning that you are going to give to regulatory framework. If you don't do it, you are going to lose your business, and this is the case. If you do not comply with the rules, no, you don't have to say we are going to lose the business. No, sorry, rather than saying we are going to lose our business if we don't comply with the regulation, we have to say we are going to lose this, that, and that, something specific. Already the OIV, they cannot say that they are compliant. On GDPR, it's a sliding field. If they talk about this, they might get a control. And one of the parties or a competitor can denounce them. So making communication about compliance, it's not easy. Americans are very strong. They send us several gigas of data. You need several weeks to do this. It's also, they are very, very strong for compliance. And they value it. But what about communicating about conformity, about compliance? The actual interest to have a curve which makes progression, which makes some progress. Teams have to show that you have to show the teams that you are making progress, and also the management, if we need their support, if we need the different teams. If we have new regulation and we have to do this and that, we have to show them. If we have a consistent way of doing things, combining different benchmarks, having a vision towards 3, 4, 5 years, we are going to, of course, improve our level of compliance, our level of risk management with a consistent vision. All these indicators allow us to make communication also with the stakeholders, and it works, really. This is what works, really, communicating about this, about the progress that we can make. Yes? 3 messages. First of all, yes, the leaders have to understand compliance. They have to understand what is positive for them. You have to make a narrative that allows you to explain why it is important to comply with this or that regulation. And also the marketing team has to be present. The marketing team has to hear, and you would be surprised to see that a person can really, if they understand it, they can make something positive out of it. So to put in the same room the risk manager and also the person who takes care of digital transformation and the marketing team, this is going to be really positive. Also something else, you said you need to have journeys. In France Relance, maybe I have heard about this morning. It was mentioned during the plenary session. In ANSI, we have defined journeys for increasing capabilities, and it allows the local authorities, our beneficiaries, to go upwards and to increase their level of maturity. or capability, because each time you go you go through one stage or one step, you make a small something to celebrate, for example. Then about relations of power. If the organizations do not take the power, are not able to communicate despite the difficulties mentioned by Ludovic, the others people are going to do this. And we have cases already of companies, which is the case of due diligence. You know what is due diligence? For example, somebody comes to evaluate your capabilities. And some companies really are informed that they are being scored at the level of their cybersecurity, and they don't agree. So this relation of power, you have to know it, because others might communicate about you, and their mindset is not necessarily positive. Yes, I do fully agree with this last element. So these are just distance compliance evaluations, which are not deep ones. Thank you very much for all these elements. We still have 15 minutes, maybe one last question before reaching your questions. So please think about your questions, if you have any, to the members of our panel. Maybe a very short question first about the evolution of the regulations. Are we going to have a GDPR 2, maybe? What's going to happen with the GDPR? Are we going to have a second piece of paper? No, I don't think so. There won't be an update because it's too recent. So, no scoop today. Vincent. The years 2010, different regulations popped out. I'm not going to talk about this because you are going to get angry, but the protection of the sensitive information, it already existed, but different elements were updated. You have seen different about the resilience of critical or essential bodies, and also our law or military programming around 2015. Then the general regulation on safety, another one about services for trusting electronic identity. Now there is a momentum when we talk about different of these regulations. It means that these regulations are being renewed. The NIS regulation, and we work a lot with the European Commission. It started in 2016. It was transposed in France in 2018. And so one of my teams is going to work in the second or third version of this GDPR. So each of these regulations are going to have a second, third version. They are going to be updated for the second time, third time. I'm not going to tell you that we are going to harmonize everything, but we are thinking about a common framework that could be included in the NIS directive, and this directive could be a common basis for different operators and companies, service providers in the EU, and they will be regulated through this directive. The idea is to make sure that it's a hub regulation and to propose one single channel for notifying incidents that has happened. There would be one single channel. So we are working on this. Nothing is sure, but we know that streamlining is really crucial. Now we can have the Q&A session. Yes, just to come back to my answer about the GDPR, there is no revolution, but we are thinking about different sector-based elements. There is a public consultation which was finalized, and there will be a final decision which is going to be published. And this is a scoop, we don't know it. We have been working on different information on internet. We know that we have to meet these demands. Very often we receive these questions, different works are being done at the European level, also about artificial intelligence. So I come back to the previous question of Vincent. Come to us. This is what he was saying. Yes, of course, we have different exchanges with the professionals. We do this for providing support to some of you. So next to the repression dimension, we provide also support. And this is very important. And we do this through the DPOs, and which are the representatives of the implementation of GDPR in your businesses. So we provide support. There is an evolution of the threats. I am in charge of the notification part. Several people in my organization work on that matter. In France, there is the Article 93. So in the different countries, there are more infringement, and people say it's because of confidentiality, or we didn't know what was GDPR. But we don't have as many infringements compared to English-speaking countries. But today we can see in the figures, in different figures, and also the feedback we receive, there is a huge increase in different sectors since the beginning of the pandemics, which is huge, and it's a reality. So there are very many different approaches, and we said that there's a legal approach, IT approach is the same for us. There are needs, there is the legal aspect, the reality of the threats, the impact on the need for us to implement an evolution of the regulation of the law. So we do this every single day with deadlines, because also it has to be a broad approach. And there is no opposition between all of this. It's a good piece of news. Yes, it's good that we have such a speed for the evolution of the benchmarks. So, do we have any question in the audience? Yes. You told us about different regulations and operational means. I think that one element is missing. We talk about compliance. What about the demonstration of this compliance? According to our activities, it's a burden. It's really hard because things are vague. What are the expectations? Okay, we know the GDPR. When do we have to notify? It's not clear every day. Things are not clear for us. What do the lawmakers expect about the compliance? And the tools that exist on the market do not necessarily help us. And how can we demonstrate this compliance? It's also important for the management, and efforts have to be done at that level. Thank you. Yes, it's a very interesting question. The question is rather, why in the regulation there is a kind of flexibility? If we put only a final, strict elements in the law and regulations, the reason is the risk analysis. and we have been talking about a specific approach to put into consistency in a specific background. Several years we said that you have to put a database of a customer in somewhere, and at the same time you have to put it on internet. So the security for the two is different. In the law today and regulation, there are both difficulties for us and regulators. For each one to define things which should be finalized, knowing also that, and the deadlines for the legal matters are not the same as the deadlines for technology. And the solutions that you are going to use today depend also on your governance and also the users. And therefore, there is this need for risk analysis and a comprehensive approach through risk analysis, and to make people accountable in the different businesses and also the state organizations, for them to become aware of these issues at stake, to try to assess at which level is it viable, is it not viable, should we notify, should we not notify? And the question always should be, what is the risk and what is the impact for the individual? And this should be the question. So sharing knowledge, this is the issue at stake, sharing competences. You are going to tell me something at the technical level, but I'm going to tell you something at the legal level. So these sharing of skills will allow us to do something consistent with the situation. We cannot provide you a final solution and fixed solution. This is why things are vague. What I mean is that this is an opportunity. This flexibility is an obligation. It's flexible because we don't tell you how to do it in an accurate way. We tell you to do it so that you can cover the risks, to face the threats in your own situation. And this is what is the most important thing. Maybe to add something, yes, I agree with Gaston. Things should not be clear, should not be accurately said. We have to have some leverage to do things. For example, there is the risk analysis. We have added, for example, different elements, and we should explain why we have added this and not added that. So we should not try to have everything fixed and finalized. We try to put different process in place. We have to be able to deploy safety without having too many constraints, to know why and how, and to be able to demonstrate it. Why? Why people take care of compliance? We have to show something that we have to take care of compliance. We cannot necessarily communicate it to the third parties. We have to have specific compliance criteria and an audit, and it's very, very concrete, and it works. About the risk management, about cyber risk management, we are being requested outcomes, not 100%, but very serious matters. Unfortunately, this is how it is. If we protect privacy, it's not because we don't want to pay fines. It's because we really want to protect the privacy of our customers. And since I have done a lot of compliance work, for example, bank cards, it's very, very complex because the two accurate measures cannot be used in this or that specific situation. Even if your benchmark is very accurate, you have to change it a little bit. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. I've never seen such a thing. Yes, Ludovic is right. We know what works and what doesn't. At the internal level, we know that these issues are not covered. Be careful not to send this to the regulator. We are aware of whether we are in compliance or not, how we implement it, and whether it does cover the need for compliance. Just maybe a comment. We have the safety audit with these different elements, penetration test, etc., that allows you to have a rather clear vision of the safety. Yes, the regulators, lawmakers have some flexibility. What are the expectations of the lawmakers? How do you have a plan to improve things? When we take care of, for example, accreditation files, what is the journey which is proposed by the, for example, company to fulfill the aim? And this whole journey is very important as well. Okay, I know that other people are going to come in this room, and also there is a plenary session. Okay, I'm going to close the meeting. Anyhow, if you have any question, still please come and see us on an individual basis. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank all the members of the panel and see you soon. Bye-bye.